The first thing I noticed wasn't the wheelchair. It was the way she was watching the door. Not nervously. Not with that particular kind of hope people wear when they're waiting for someone who might not show up. She was watching the door the way someone watches a weather pattern, just trying to figure out what was coming. I almost didn't go in. I'd been standing outside the restaurant for 2 minutes, which is longer than it sounds when it's February in Calgary. And the wind off the Bow River has a way of making you reconsider every decision you've made in the past 24 hours. My breath was fogging up in front of me, and I kept thinking about the group chat message from my buddy Corey that morning. Just trust me, man. She's perfect for you. Dinner's at 7. Don't be weird about it. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. The restaurant was called Juniper and Rye, one of those spots on 17th Avenue that looks like someone took a cabin and poured a lot of money into it. Exposed wood beams, Edison bulbs, a chalkboard menu that changes every week. Corey had picked it because Corey likes to feel like he has taste. His girlfriend Amber had agreed because Amber likes anything that photographs well for her Instagram. I pushed open the door. The hostess led me toward the back corner table, and that's when I saw her properly. Sitting across from where the empty seat was waiting for me. Short dark hair tucked behind one ear, a dark green sweater, a half-finished glass of water in front of her. Her wheelchair was parked slightly to the side of the table, and she'd transferred into the regular chair. Something I wouldn't understand until later, the effort that quietly involved. Corey and Amber were already there too, seated across from each other. Corey had this expression on his face I'd seen exactly once before, at a hockey game in 2019 when he'd bet $50 on the wrong team and was waiting to see if he'd been right. Hopeful. Nervous. Trying not to show either. Amber had her phone face down on the table, which meant she was paying attention. Amber only puts her phone down when something is about to be interesting. You made it, Corey said, too loud, too cheerful. Traffic, I said, which wasn't true. I'd taken the C train. I sat down. The woman across from me looked at me, and I looked at her, and there was a half-second of something, not awkwardness exactly. More like two people taking a quiet measurement of each other. Declan, I said, and held out my hand. Mina, she said. Her handshake was firm. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow that I noticed, and then tried not to keep noticing. So, Corey said, and there was already something wrong with how he said it. Too much warmth. The kind of warmth that comes from relief rather than genuine friendliness. Mina, Declan just moved to Calgary about 8 months ago, right, Dec? He's in mechanical engineering, works for one of the firms out in the Northeast. Declan, Mina and I went to high school together. I can introduce myself, Mina said. Pleasantly, but clearly. Corey laughed in that way people laugh when they've been called out and are pretending they haven't. Of course. Yeah, sorry. Mina looked at me. I manage a bookshop on Kensington Road. Before that, I was in occupational therapy, but I wanted to do something that felt more like mine. We sell used and new, do a reading series on Thursday nights. It's small, but it's good. That sounds genuinely good, I said, and I meant it. The menus arrived. The conversation moved in the careful, polite circles that first dates move in. Where are you from? Originally. How do you know Corey? What do you think of Calgary winters? The usual cartography of a stranger. Mina was from Edmonton originally, had moved here 6 years ago, thought Calgary winters were aggressive, but preferred them to Edmonton's because at least here you got Chinooks. She had opinions about the LRT expansion. She'd read almost everything by Miriam Tews and thought most people who said they had too hadn't actually finished the last one. I liked her. That's the part I want to be clear about. I'm not telling this story because it ends with me learning a lesson I didn't expect to learn. I'm telling it because I liked her, genuinely, within the first 15 minutes, and the rest of the evening kept trying to get in the way of that. Somewhere around the time the appetizers arrived, I noticed the way Corey and Amber were watching us. It wasn't warm. That's the thing. I'd been reading it as nervousness, as that particular friend energy of wanting a setup to go well. But it wasn't that. It was something closer to anticipation. They kept glancing at each other, small quick looks, like two people tracking a shared joke they hadn't told yet. When the server came to check on us, Mina asked about whether the gnocchi had any dairy. She mentioned she was lactose intolerant, and I saw Amber bite the inside of her cheek, suppressing something. I asked Mina about the bookshop. She told me they'd been fighting with the landlord about the lease for 3 months, that the used books section was always the one that surprised people because half the books had notes in the margins, and she'd started displaying the ones with particularly good margin notes on a little table near the door. She'd sold 17 books that way in November alone. People like knowing someone else cared about a thing, she said. Yeah, I said, they do. Corey cleared his throat. He did it the way people clear their throats when they're about to introduce a subject they've been building toward. So, Mina, he said, Declan didn't know anything about tonight, just so you know. I set this up kind of, on his behalf. I gathered, Mina said. He's actually. Corey glanced at me, and I saw something complicated in his face, something I'd been too distracted to read properly until now. He's never dated anyone with, a disability before. I thought it would be good for him. The table went quiet, not the comfortable kind. Mina's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it. The way a window looks the same from outside right before the light inside goes off. I felt something move through me that I don't have a clean word for. It was somewhere between anger and embarrassment, not at Mina, not for me, but the particular humiliation of realizing you've been used as someone else's prop without knowing it. Corey, I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. What? I just meant. I know what you meant. I didn't look at Amber. I didn't need to. I could feel the shape of what this evening had been from the beginning. The double date that wasn't really a double date. The setup that wasn't really about setting us up. Mina had been chosen because Corey thought her presence would provoke a reaction. Something uncomfortable that he and Amber could exchange looks over. A story to tell later. I picked up my water glass. I set it down. I looked at Mina. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know he was going to say that. I didn't know any of. I stopped. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, Is this the part where you tell me you're totally fine with it and not to worry, and you're a very open-minded person? I almost smiled, which surprised me. No. Good, she said. Corey was doing a thing where he was talking. Something about how he hadn't meant it badly, how he just thought we'd be good together, how he'd been trying to help, but I'd stopped tracking it. I was watching Mina, who was watching me with something careful and evaluating in her expression, like she was trying to determine whether I was going to be another version of the same problem. Can I ask you something? I said. You can try. Has this happened to you before? The setup where someone thought they were doing you a favor by picking the most. I stopped again, looking for the right word. Progressive person in the room, she offered. I was going to say clueless, she laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that happens before you've decided to let it. Yes, she said, more than once. My personal favorite was the guy who spent the whole dinner explaining accessibility legislation to me. I manage a fully accessible storefront. I have read the legislation. That's a special kind of awful. It had its own category. Yeah. Corey had stopped talking. He and Amber were watching us now with the particular bewildered look of people whose plan has gone somewhere they didn't anticipate. I think, I said to Mina, if you wanted to leave, no one would blame you. I'll pay for whatever you've had, and I'd understand. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her menu again. The gnocchi has dairy, she said, but the duck looks good. Tell me about what you actually do, not the job title, the thing you spend your days thinking about. So I told her. I told her about the months I'd spent working on a pipeline assessment project in the Northeast, the particular, unglamorous satisfaction of solving a problem that no one would ever see solved, because the whole point was that nothing would fail. I told her about the rental I'd found in Ramsey after 2 months of bad Kijiji listings. The way the neighborhood surprised me every time I walked through it. The Ukrainian bakery that had been there since 1987 and was run by a woman who called everyone Han, regardless of age or apparent interest in perogies. She listened the way some people do, not waiting for her turn, actually in it. Corey ordered a second beer. Amber mostly looked at her phone now that the evening wasn't going the way she'd expected. The dinner continued, but it had split into 2 separate things. The table Corey and Amber were sitting at, and the conversation Mina and I were having. At some point, she told me about the year she'd spent after her accident. She'd been 23. A car accident outside Red Deer, the kind of thing that happens so quickly that the before and after feel like 2 different stories about 2 different people. She said she didn't talk about it on first dates, usually. She said usually she waited to see if there was going to be a second one first. I didn't say anything for a moment. I'm glad you told me, I said finally. Don't make a thing of it, she said. I wasn't going to. Most people do. I know, I said. I'm not most people. She looked at me with that evaluating expression again. That's a very confident thing to say about yourself. I know that too. She smiled. It was small, but it was real. When the checks came, separate. Because neither of us had any illusion about this being one of those dinners where someone gallantly picks up the whole table. Corey pulled me aside on the way to the coat rack. Amber was in the bathroom. Mina was at the door, putting on her jacket with the ease of someone who has been managing the logistics of their own life without assistance for a long time. I thought you'd be weirded out, Corey said. I looked at him for a moment. We'd been friends since second year at U of A. I knew the shape of who he was mostly. He wasn't cruel, he was careless, which sometimes amounts to the same thing. I was weirded out, I said. Just not by Mina. He had the grace to look down at his boots. You used her, I said. You set up a dinner so you could watch me be uncomfortable, or so you could feel like you did something interesting. I don't know which one, but either way, it wasn't about her. Deck, I'm not trying to have a whole thing about it tonight, I said, but you should think about it. I put on my coat. Mina glanced over at me from the door and gave me a look that said she'd probably heard some of that. Outside, on 17th, the cold hit immediately. Mina's breath clouded in the dark air. A couple walked by laughing about something private. A C train rattled past 2 blocks over, its sound carrying clean through the cold. For what it's worth, Mina said, that was better than the accessibility legislation dinner. High bar. The bar was underground. Yeah, I smiled. We stood there for a moment, both of us facing the street, not quite leaving yet. There's a coffee place on 11th that does a really good cortado, I said. If you wanted to continue the conversation somewhere that isn't a Corey production. She considered this. Mina, I would come to learn, always considered things, not out of hesitation, but out of a genuine habit of thinking before she spoke. It was something I'd spend a lot of the next year deeply grateful for. The bookshop opens at 10 tomorrow, she said. I have to be there at 9. But the cortado sounds okay. We walked. The city was doing the thing Calgary does in February, cold and sharp-edged and strangely beautiful when the sky is clear enough to see the stars, which it was. Mina talked about a novel she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks that kept getting interrupted by inventory. I told her about a problem at work I'd been turning over in my head for 2 days and couldn't solve. She offered an observation that was entirely off-field and completely correct, the way people sometimes do when they're thinking freshly about something you've been too close to. We stayed at the coffee place until 11:30. The cortado was good. She had a tea. When she left, she didn't hug me. She shook my hand again. Same firm grip as the beginning of the night, but there was something different in it. A kind of quiet acknowledgement. Declan, she said. Mina, I said. She left. I walked to the C train station with my hands in my pockets and the cold making my eyes water. I didn't text Corey that night. I didn't text him the next day either. He sent me a message around noon that said, "So how'd it go?" And I left it on read for a week, which he understood, because he knew me well enough to know what that meant. What I did do the next morning was walk to Kensington Road and find the bookshop. It had a green awning and a sandwich board out front with a quote on it. Something from a Mavis Gallant story, short and precise. Through the window, I could see shelves going all the way to the ceiling and a small table near the door with a handwritten sign that said books with good margins. I didn't go in. I wasn't ready to do that as anything other than what it would obviously be. But I stood there for a minute, reading the quote on the sandwich board, and I thought about the way she'd said people like knowing someone else cared about a thing and how I'd said, "Yeah, they do," and had meant it completely. I texted her that afternoon. Walked past the shop. "You're right about the margin notes table. Clever." She replied 12 minutes later. "How do you know? You didn't come in." The sign was visible from outside. Stalker. Definitely. She sent a single laughing emoji, which, I would learn, was the only one she ever used. She found all the others excessive. We had dinner the following week. Not a double date. Just the two of us. A ramen place in Chinatown that she knew, and I didn't, where she ordered with the ease of someone who'd been going there for years, and the owner called her by name. Corey and I talked eventually. It was a hard conversation and an honest one, and we're still friends, but differently. Some things, once you see them, stay visible. He knows that I know what that evening was built around, and he's had to sit with that. I think it's made him more careful, which isn't nothing. The bookshop is doing better now. The landlord situation got resolved. Not without a fight. Not without Mina spending 2 months documenting every violation and seeing everyone who needed to be CC'd, which is the way she approaches most problems, thoroughly and without drama. The Thursday reading series has a waitlist. She added a section in the back for Indigenous authors that's become the part of the shop that gets written about most, in these small Calgary arts blogs that pay attention to those things. I have a key to the shop now. She has a key to my place in Ramsey. These are not small things. Last month, she was shelving a new shipment and I was supposed to be helping. But mostly I was reading the margin notes in a copy of The Stone Angel that someone had gone through with a red pen years ago, writing questions in the spaces. Why doesn't she just ask? One note said, because she doesn't know how to want things someone else had written underneath it, in different ink. Years later, two strangers in conversation across time, I showed it to Mina. She looked at it for a long moment. That one goes on the table, she said. She put it there herself. Outside, the February light was already fading, the short, brutal days of a Calgary winter doing their thing, and the shop was warm and smelled like old paper and coffee from the little machine behind the counter. And I thought about that first night, standing outside Juniper and Rye, fogging up the cold air, almost not going in. I'm glad I went in, not because everything after that was easy. It wasn't. Not because Corey's plan accidentally worked, which it didn't. What came after had nothing to do with what he'd intended, but because sometimes you walk through a door at the wrong time for the wrong reasons, and the room on the other side turns out to be exactly right. Mina would say that's a sentimental way to put it. She's probably correct, but she'd also say, has said, actually more than once, that sentiment isn't the same as being wrong.